Let's imagine I didn't know you, which would be a sad world for sure. So let's just say I didn't, and I've met you, and we're at a bar, we're having a chai maca latte. Why would you explain you went traveling, and would traveling even be the word that you use?
I guess the one thing I regretted that I wasn't able to do when I was a teenager was sort of world travel. I have various opportunities, but I decided to start a business instead. I literally had to kind of make that choice. So it was always in the back of my mind. And when I had the money and the means and the companion in my then girlfriend and then wife, we developed this kind of wanderlust. So we traveled the world, did our own version of backpacking, did some kind of like slow travel as well. And then when we had kids, we also explored that as well. So we took kids with us on business courses to Bali, to South Africa, and purposefully brought them with us because we didn't want to ever feel restricted by the fact that we had kids and we couldn't do something, right? It was always like viewing the world as, not the circumstances were never supposed to be a barrier to what we did and how we approach life. Okay. So we did that, and they were really super valuable experiences, and just be able to see my kids in new schools at the age of, well, they would have been like from the age of like 5 and 3. And from that sort of age group, going to new countries and seeing these new experiences and seeing their faces and perspective on, oh, this is how other people live. This isn't how we live in our little middle-class village in England. This is very, very different, right? So that was the first thing. And then had a very challenging few years from 2019 through 2020, linked in with the whole COVID thing. And as you know, I wasn't very well. So I was in and out of hospital. So it was really was a time for me to contemplate why I was doing what I was doing in the way that I was doing it, and facing mortality and realizing this isn't what life is about. The life we kind of built became a little bit of a trap. And so we wanted to explore being together. Like, my life kind of shrunk down literally to the two most important things in my life right now are my kids and my wife, and basically spending time together in a completely different environment so we can get that perspective and those connections together. And that's what we did. We sold everything pretty much and set off. Interestingly, the constraints that were created around that time enabling us to travel. So it was 2021, in the summer of 2021. COVID was still a thing. We were in a very restrictive travel lockdown in the UK, and the only place we could fly to, the only place that Boris Johnson would let us fly to, was Mexico, which is where you were.
Viva Mexico!
Which is where you were, right? And at that time, getting on that plane was very, very difficult because there's no one flying. Everyone was scared. Everywhere was on the red list. If you flew to any countries, they weren't going to let you back in the UK. Literally, that was what was happening at the time when we were deciding to travel. But we didn't care. We were like, we don't care about coming back. And then in the short term, we're going for minimum a year, 18 months, and see what happens. And yeah, so traveling, we did a couple of months in Mexico. Nowhere else was open. And so we were just checking the websites, the internet, and seeing, well, where's open? Oh, Costa Rica will let us in now, And so we went to Costa Rica, and then you spend another month or two in Costa Rica. Oh, Guatemala's open to us now. So we traveled like that, in that way, which was super valuable and very different. So a long way in answering why did we travel and what did we get from it. We could talk about that a little bit more, but that's my little precursor story into the journey we started on. I'm interested to know yours as well.
My missus came home one day and she just looked at me and she said, I think we need to go to Mexico. I remember it. Because as you were telling your story, I've not taken my mind back to the airports. We left before the second lockdown. So the first lockdown, when, at least in England anyway, it was blue skies, which doesn't happen often. And then everyone was like, okay, planes definitely are a conspiracy. Because it was weird. Like, lockdown happened. And when you live in the north, which is just, I often call it a grey puddle, it's just a constant, it's not even a cloud. It's like the whole blue sky is just grey. And the day after lockdown, I'm not joking, it's the bluest skies I've ever seen. And it
Oh.
stayed blue skies forever. We drank gin in the garden. We actually made a den out of our washing hanger, and we hung, the square ones that spin. We hung sheets over it. I remember that lockdown. No one had a clue what was going on. I ran a business and I didn't have a clue what was going on, but nothing, you couldn't do anything.
Mm.
And then lockdown lifted and we left during that time. Um, so we were in we were in that lockdown, that first summer one that was kind of, let's just say, if there was a better part of the COVID lockdown, at least that one certainly everyone it hadn't all unpacked itself. So once it reopened again, Christina came home one day and said, I think we should go to Mexico. And for the majority of our relationship, I'd always been the less grounded of the two. You know, if there was harebrained and wacky ideas and doing this, and we'd been fortunate enough, we spent a few months in Brazil. I traveled for like 4 years in my 20s. And as a couple, we'd seen and done a lot. We started in a long distance relationship anyway. So for the first year, every 2 weeks, we'd be all over the country meeting each other. But I didn't want to go to Mexico. Of all the Central South American countries, it was probably lowest on my list or bottom quarter. And what came up for me when you were sharing your story actually was it wasn't real until we booked the flight. And I remember we'd agreed to go, but I can't remember. There was a period that it was just longer than it needed to be. And we were like, are we going or are we not going? Like it wasn't real until that flight got booked. and I can't remember the conversation. I just remember the outcome from it, where we were like, what are we actually waiting for? We'd agreed to go, but we hadn't booked it. And so there was this moment of like, well, shall we book it? And then we said, yeah. And then we were like, well, when? And they were both like, well, now. And we literally just went, found a flight and booked it. And that was really big for me. And I've been all over the world and run businesses and done deals and great stuff and hires and fires and all sorts of weird stuff. But that moment was really powerful. And especially because it was driven in that instance by Christina, who traditionally in our relationship, I'd driven all the crazy ideas. But I loved the fact that it was coming from her. And I was like, let's go. And so our impetus came from her side of the equation. And she just, in a short space of time, loads of people have said, why don't you go to Mexico? And I think that day, like 3 people have said it. And we were already thinking a little bit about leaving. So when she came home, she's like, I think the sign is let's go to Mexico. And my answer effectively, after a little bit of kicking and screaming, because I realized I didn't think I was ready, was actually like, fuck it, let's go. Worst case scenario, you come home, right? So we didn't have a plan. We weren't necessarily looking to leave England like full time, but at the same time, we had nothing to stay for. We'd sold the business. It just naturally unfolded in that direction. And then we looked what was open. So you kind of looked and found Mexico. I remember saying, well, do we even know if it's open? And then we looked and realized everywhere was closed apart from Mexico. And that began our journey. I called a friend and they said, whatever you do, don't spend time in Mexico City straight away, kind of get out. So we went to Tepoztlan and then from there just used buses and traveled across the country a little bit until we settled somewhere near the Riviera for a bit. But I could unpack it further, but that was our primary spot of staying, and we kind of moved out and came back and expanded and came back from there over about 3-year period. But that was our impetus that started it all off.
So for both of us, and certainly during that period over COVID, which basically lasted best part of 2 years, really, most people in lockdown for most of it, or not leaving their home country for the second part of it. But the impetus for both of us was we do not want to be in our home countries at this moment in time, for whatever reason, calling or a calling of some description pulled us away, and we had to sort of sit with the fact that that we were making a big life decision. I think for both of us, we weren't escaping; we were running towards something new, right? That's the way we were viewing it, right? It wasn't whatever was going on in the UK at the time, in the circles that we were in, certainly. Then it felt like the country was divided, and you were sort of came down on one sort of side of it. But regardless, that wasn't the reason. The reason was running towards something new. Certainly for our family, and it sounds like it was for you as well.
I'd probably describe our side as less about running towards something. We wanted different, and it's not to say that we were unhappy, but I couldn't say we were happy. We were just ready for something different. We're like, life has to be able to be different than this.
Yeah.
And you kind of know it intuitively, and you might know it logically because you've been away. But I think like you had family and kids, so you've got a few more factors to consider. From our side, that we had me and Christina, and we just looked at it and was like, well, it wasn't even a risk. I mean, the worst risk is you just bloody come home, right? But it's a drive or a desire for something more fulfilling, let's say. And you might not have used those words at the time, but I'm going to say that's really what it was. We were looking for, you mentioned wanderlust. Yeah. I'm often interested, like, when do we lose that sense of wonder? And I think that's all we wanted. We were just ready for something new, something different, and to change things up a little bit and rediscover life.
Mm, definitely. Well, quite often when people sort of take a look at what we've done in the last few years, the journey we've been on, and the question becomes, how have you done what you do? And when I've sort of sat down with it and really thought about it, if I had to sort of explain the biggest growth hacks for human beings that I can see, one is 100% starting a business and making your own living, and the second one is travel, not holiday, not holidaying, going to resorts, living in hotels, living in expensive Airbnbs, but traveling. And the discomfort of that gives you a different level of perspective in terms of how other people live, how you have to live. We talk about it, we've spoken about it a number of times, all the little foibles that happen in terms of the traveling type of living, slow travel, we'll call it. But the biggest thing that I want to talk about next is the minimal aspect of that kind of life and the liberation that you have from it. Because, people think they have many ties back to their homes, all the things you acquire, the nest that you kind of create when you're living at home, feels like something you want to protect. And it can feel a little bit, you start to feel vulnerable when you explore the world in a different way with less stuff in unfamiliar environments that are a little bit uncomfortable. But when we had to sell everything. We sold one of our businesses, and it was still in lockdown. So we still couldn't go into many buildings and have meetings with people. And we got dropped off at Heathrow with the company car that we were selling the company to some other buyers. And we rocked up at some airport hotel at Heathrow Airport, and we took our bags out of the company car. We stood in the car park. The guy who's buying the business comes and takes the key off us and drives off in the last car as the car sort of sails off and disappears down the motorway, and we're left in the hotel airport just with 4 bags, and that's now our life, right? It's kind of like this really weird shedding of the last sort of part of your life, and you're left with that. But that was one of the most liberating. That fact felt felt vulnerable, but it also felt very freeing. And as you travel the world with one bag, you realize it's the most liberating thing you can do from the point of view of letting go of all the shit that you think you need in your life, right? Because everything boils down to the most important things are the people I'm with and the stuff I've got in this bag. And some of that's not
So
even that important.
and then let me put my parallel on that, and then I want to ask you about bags, right? So you got dropped off at an airport in the company car of the company you just sold, and then they drove off, and that's like the last remnant, yeah?
Ah,
We were at home and we'd made the decision to leave. I don't know whether we booked the flight or not booked the flight. And we used to run these events called conscious dinner clubs where we just invite people around, half friends, half strangers, and cook and just have conversations, yeah? And so we're at one of these, and Christina had said to me, "What would perfect be?" And we'd done the exact same thing with the business. Like, what would the perfect business sale be like? And we were like, "What's the perfect house sale like?" Because you're like, do you sell your house? Do you rent your house? What do you do with the stuff in your house? Like, which are all big questions to answer. So we said, okay, well, what would perfect be? And I was like, well, perfect would be somebody you know who just wants to rent your house as is, and we can just leave. And then that week we had our dinner club, and I'm sat opposite a friend, and he comes up from London, or he was renting in Manchester, and he said, I think I've made the decision. Me and my missus are going to move in together. We're going to look for a house. And I was like, oh, cool. What are you looking for? And he said, if I'm really honest, and I said, yeah. And he went, I'd love a house like your house. So obviously, like my brain kind of picks up, and you're like, okay. I was like, well, like our house. He's like, well, literally, like this area. I love everything you've done with the house, everything. And I was like, oh. And I said, what about pets? We had a cat at the time, and he's like, I'd love a cat. I'd love a pet. And I said, what pet? And he went, I'd love a cat. I was like, so you'd like a house just like our house in an area just like our house, and you'd like a cat? And I said, yeah. He said, yeah. And I said, well, roughly then, what would you look to, hypothetically, what would you pay? So he gave me a figure, and I was like, it was bang on the mark of what we were looking to rent for. And I said, just give me a minute. And I left and got Christina and came back. And I was like, what if we rented you our house for that much money? And he's like, yeah, but I'm looking at it like pretty soon. I was like, we're ready to go whenever you are. And and then he's like, wow. And then I came back later on at night and I said, I'll do you another deal. He said, what? I said, what if I left everything in the house? So we agreed something like 2 grand, yeah, to leave all the plates, cups, dishes, stuff in the fridge, everything. All I took was my Vitamix. Yeah, everybody, if you don't have a Vitamix, You know, everybody loves a Vitamix once you've got one. And what's that brand of pans that once you've got one, you know it's a good pan? Le Creuset.
Okay,
Yeah.
yeah.
Other pans and other blenders are available. And so I kept my blue Le Creuset pan. I kept the Vitamix, maybe one other thing that I can't remember, the dehydrator. And so basically, we packed our bags, got in. They arrived that whatever day we did the handover. They arrived in the morning with a couple of their bags. We packed our bags, walked out of our house, handed them the key, and walked into a taxi with the only things you love, which is your family at that time for me and Christina, and your bags. Right. So
Well,
two strangely symbiotic stories. But here's my bag question for you, because you talk about minimal travel. Reflecting back on what you left that house with compared to what you were traveling with later on, how much did you learn about what you actually need? Because that in itself was a huge journey for us. And we left with two big 60-liter backpacks and
mm,
an 80-liter hard shell case. And by the time we're 6 years in now, we now travel with a 60-liter and a 40-liter, a tiny and two tiny little like a day pack. And that's it.
yeah. Yeah, yeah. Well, you shed all the little gadgets that you kind of like you just talked about buying stuff on Amazon, right? In the lead up to us leaving, we thought, oh, we need this travel gadget. Amazon arrives. Oh, we need this, you know, clothesline. You're kind of anticipating all these different things that you're going to need. And yeah, we had a whole other bag that was just full of that kind of stuff, which I reckon we didn't even use. We didn't keep any of it. It all got given away to people as we
Yeah.
were traveling around. So yeah, your life completely shrinks down. The interesting story as well is that we didn't realize, I mean, we were never super materialistic in terms of buying loads of stuff. But kids growing up in the environment they did in the UK, there's just this, whenever you go anywhere, you end up buying some candy or some sweets or some little plastic toy they had. There's the most important thing in the world for them right now. Christmas presents, they just, when they have the stocking fillers, just all these little bits and pieces of little gadgets, little toys, plastic tat, I called it, because the kids were still young when we left. And so they do end up, you don't realize that these kids end up with a little bit of a materialist mindset in the, hey, that's cheap, can I have it? Or whatever. And so their personal backpacks were filled with all sorts of crap that they took with them. To them, those were the most important things. They had their clothes and everything. We were carrying those, but there were personal backpacks they took on the plane with them, had all the little things in that were the most important to them in the world. And as we traveled, we were seeing more of these plastic tat, and all these different things. They were like, oh, can I have this? Can I have that? And the conversation we had to them was like, you can barely close the zip on your bag right now, right? What are you going to remove from there in order to put something else in? And they sat and thought about it for a while. And when they had to make the choice, or when we'd given them the choice, they went, nah, I'm all right. Don't want to, right? And so, and over time, they shed all the different bits and pieces that they also had in there. So that was something. We got rid of a lot of stuff. You end up wearing clothes until they fall off you, right? And you might say, oh, we'll go to a fancy restaurant next week. And you realize that some of your clothes are not in the fit state to look as presentable as you might have previously thought, but you begin to not care as well. But that story, I always remember very well about the kids going through that process and them really learning to shed things that they thought were important. Thank God, because the amount of times we got stuck in airport security, rummaging through the bottom of a bag to find a rock or a stone or some sort of metal or something that they've acquired along the way, right? So another little stories of traveling with kids trying to get through airports. But 100%, you do with very little, right? And it's a gradual shift. But the people talk about minimalism. The liberation you get from that, shrinking your life down to something like that, well, it's unmeasurable until you realize until you try and do it.
I think there's another aspect to this as well, and I haven't watched it, but it came in my field yesterday. It's a Netflix documentary. I want to say Shopify. That's a bloody web hoster, isn't it? It's a documentary about materialism and spending and the psychology of spending and how people. It is called Buy Now Shopping Conspiracy. Oh, it's called Buy Now. That's it.
Okay. Yeah.
So I've not watched it, but it's on my list. It came back in my field the other day. In my opinion, so I've never been a massive shopper. I like to buy things, and I love upgrading some of my tech and everything, but I wouldn't by nature say that I'm a big shopper. And I'm going to say that now that I'm 6 years into just moving and traveling and carrying what I own, I appreciate every item I have. And this last, every now and again, we bypass through the UK, kind of, resort some stuff out. We've got a bag in a lockup. And this time, I was really aware of looking at all the clothes in this instance and looking and going like, I still haven't worn you. You know that when you go on holiday and you take one
Sure.
new t-shirt for every day and a pair of
That's
socks for every day and a pair of boxers for every day, and then you get home and you've worn a third. So
Yeah.
even with stripping stuff down, I still found that I'd hold something up and be like, I love you, but I clearly don't because I haven't worn you. And I'm given, even when that goes back through this other thing goes through the wash and comes back, I still choose that over the thing I haven't worn yet. So when I left this time, I thought, what do I really need? And I was like, I need 3 shirts, 3 vests, 3 shorts, a week's worth of boxers, and that's it. And it's the first time ever I have stripped down to clothing wise. I think in the end I took 5 pairs of boxers because I calculated how long I could make them last and then washing and everything. And I still don't wear one of my shirts, one of my shorts, and one of my vests. I'll still, when all the vests get washed, I'll wear those 2 before I wear that one. So now I'm looking, I was like, why am I carrying you? So you just become, I think my appreciation for items, I'm just gonna say items, and then when we go to buy, we make it's a very conscious decision.